So I'm Sarita Gupta. I am the National Director of Jobs and Justice. I'm based in Washington, D.C. And about 6 years ago, myself and a woman named Ai-jen Koo, who runs the National Domestic Workers Alliance, came together and helped co-found this campaign called Caring Across Generations. And it was actually born out of hearing stories like Mike's and stories like the videos, and realizing that there wasn't a comprehensive approach to how we really deal with the issues of care in our culture and in our society, that were clearly growing care needs. And one of the things we realized very quickly, in fact, was often the needs of families were pitted against the needs of the workforce. And so when you set it up as workers versus families, no one wins at the end. And so our theory was we need to build a movement of families, of caregivers, of people with disabilities, of aging adults who can together transform the way we care in America. And that's precisely what Caring Across Generations is. And I'm really excited to be here both with Brendan, who's a member of the Jobs and Justice National Team, and Josie Callie Petty, who is our Policy Director at Caring Across Generations. So in addition to being a co-director of Caring Across, I too am a sandwich generation caregiver. And so for me, when people say work can be personal, they're not kidding in my case, it really is. And so I'll share a little bit of that story in a bit. But I guess I want to zoom out for a moment and talk about the bigger political context that we're in, and the work that you all are attempting to do here in Rhode Island, why it is so critical. I feel like there are two consistent storylines right now in American media and in American public life today, right? One is the story of economic struggle, right? That more and more, like the insecurity of working Americans. People are working harder, but they can't keep their heads above water, right? Like we keep hearing that story. And at the same time, as we dig into that story, what we're learning is the story focuses on the challenges of work and family, just as we saw in these videos and as we heard from Mike's own story, that not only are people not able to earn enough in wages to sustain themselves and their families, they're not actually able to afford childcare, education, elder care, or they're feeling incredibly isolated as family caregivers and feeling like their caregiving responsibilities are basically invisible, right? As again, we heard through these videos. The other storyline that's in the public right now is who's to blame, like who should be blamed for this? And some point to a broken democracy. The most dangerous among them is rooted in racism, in xenophobia, in blaming the other, whenever, whoever the other may be. It's actually not a new story, and in fact, I would say in a way it's our default, right? Othering takes on a role and new power in times of economic hardship, which is what we're experiencing as a country right now. And so what we see is with incredible shifts in our demography and our economy be underway right now, the implications actually for the othering and the blaming go from pretty devastating to deadly, right? So in this context, I think as a country, we need solutions that actually speak to the universal needs across race, across class, and across generations. We really need bold solutions right now that truly are game-changing for people and that really address the economic hardships that people are experiencing. And so it's because actually if we have these big, bold ideas, it actually gives us spaciousness, right? It gives us space and the possibility to imagine together what the world is that we're striving for. And the truth is we saw it under the Obama campaign. People want a sense of hope. People want to lean into aspiration. And so it's on us as social movement leaders, as policymakers, as community leaders to be able to say in this moment, here are the bold and aspirational solutions that people can actually come together around in order to really make the world we want possible. So one such idea is in fact this idea of universal family care. And so it's really built on the premise that here we are almost 2 decades into the new millennium. Yet we still have a caregiving system that was built during the Leave It to Beaver 1950s framework, right? And when really the economy, the workforce, and families just looked radically different. You had one breadwinner and you had one stay-at-home parent. That was at least the mythologized American household. In the years since, we know a number of social and economic forces have totally and dramatically shifted that. Women are now in the paid workforce in growing numbers, globalization, and certainly the digital revolution among them. But meanwhile, the traditional tentpoles of a middle-class life, things like a home, an education for kids, a union, a retirement savings, are all getting harder to come by for most people. And so it's simply not working anymore. So we think it's really time to create a system of care that reflects both the financial and the cultural realities of today's modern family. So here's the thing. These stories were a slice of what we know so many Americans are facing right now. Millions of families are heading down a road attempting to juggle their childcare and their elder care, let alone their own healthcare needs, right? So just a little bit on demography. We're in the midst of an unprecedented elder boom, right? So every 8 seconds, a baby boomer reaches the age of 65. That's almost 1 in 5 Americans by 2025 will be over the age of 65, right? That's a huge population. So we are rapidly aging as a nation right now. By 2050, the number of us who will require some form of support just to meet our basic daily living needs, because we're living longer, is going to double. 27 million of us will need some form of support. I'm not even saying these are people who have Alzheimer's like my father. I'm talking about people who just need like a little bit of assistance so they can remain at home and live at home and in their communities. At the same time that this is happening, we are seeing the first wave of millennials beginning to have children. And so the numbers, the most recent data we've seen is about 4 million babies are born a year. So you have 4 million babies born a year and 4 million Americans turning 65 who are eventually needing, if not right away, needing some support. That's a lot of care needs in this country. Yet we don't have the workforce or the supports for working families or families in general to be able to navigate this terrain. And just a second on the workforce, we really don't have the workforce that we need in place to really meet these care needs. Caregivers such as nannies and home care workers are disproportionately women and people of color, and they work under really strenuous, highly vulnerable conditions, and really for poverty wages, as you heard actually from one of the stories. They can't even make ends meet. Majority of home care workers are in fact on public assistance programs. One of the things we learned during the most recent fight, and actually Josie can speak to this, around the fight around Medicaid, was that majority of home care workers actually depend on Medicaid in order to get their own health care, right? So they can't even sustain themselves and their families. That's like one of the contradictions of our economy, the way it's set up. So we pay people to care for our loved ones, and they don't make enough to be able to take care of themselves and their own families. It doesn't have to be this way. It just doesn't have to be this way. So our system for supporting family caregiving as a whole is just broken, from childcare to long-term care needs. So I I want to share a couple of things. I mean, as I said, more women are joining the workforce, as we know, and they're facing outrageous costs, whether it's childcare costs or elder care costs. And the burden is falling on many of us, like myself, who are in the sandwich generation. And I actually like to describe it as the panini generation, because you really are squeezed between the care needs of like both ends of the spectrum in your family. And so in my case, my father was diagnosed with Alzheimer's 5 years ago. I grew up in Rochester, New York, and he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. My mom was his sole care provider for about a year. And then I went up and visited her in Rochester and realized that she was overwhelmed by caring for him and continuing to manage a household and like to care for herself. And as a result, we made a decision as a family to move. So my parents moved from their 40-year-old home in the community that my parents were like leaders in the Indian immigrant community in Rochester. They established the community center. They were really active, and it was a big deal. There were elders in the community to leave. But they made the choice themselves that they wanted to live near me and live near my siblings. And so they moved to Silver Spring, Maryland, which is where I live. And actually my sister moved from California to Silver Spring so that the two of us could actually share the role and responsibilities of caring for my parents. And I have a brother who's still on the West Coast. He's our respite care issue. So anyway, or solution. But in all honesty, at the same time as I'm caring for my parents, and my mom actually has severe mobility issues. She's got arthritis. It's bad. So while I'm caring for them, I also have a 7-year-old daughter. And so my husband and I really literally feel squeezed often. I mean, it's hard enough to build a multi-generational home, but real shifts in our lifestyles, as you can imagine. And so I share this story just to say that I find it overwhelming as somebody who's an advocate in this work to do that and work full time. I can't imagine how many people are like juggling all these different roles, and I'm lucky enough to have a job with benefits and job security. Most people don't. And so what that means for our society moving forward. So here's a statistic I want you all to like hold seriously as you think about how you are going to be pioneers in actually creating the care infrastructure that we need. About half the workforce expects to be providing care for elders in the next 5 years. Okay, I'm going to say that again. Nearly half the U.S. workforce will actually be providing care for elders in the next 5 years. I think people have not really had that sink in yet. So it may not be as extreme as parents moving in with you, like in my case, but you still will have responsibilities, as we heard. Is it Varick? Vadik talk about his siblings trying to figure out money and supports for their mom who lives part-time in Florida and part-time here. Like, this is a reality that more and more families are going to be facing. And it's not just a little bit of care, by the way. It's a substantial amount. Right now, there's 42.5 million of us who are sandwich generation caregivers. And on average, half provide an average of 20 hours of family care per week while also working full-time. It's unsustainable. It's unsustainable for most people. So we need an infrastructure right now, care infrastructure, that is going to create more access to quality, dignified, affordable care choices for families and individuals. We need more support for families. We need to acknowledge the invisible caregiving responsibilities that working people have. If you work somewhere where you don't have paid sick days, you don't have paid family leave, and even under paid family leave, elder care is not included in the definition of paid family leave. Imagine, like, those are two examples in and itself beyond needing wages, like higher wages. How are families supposed to navigate this? So we need more support for families, and certainly for family caregivers who do leave the workforce and care for their loved ones and then have to figure out how to re-enter the workforce. We also need millions of caregiving jobs with adequate training and benefits and living wages. So that is the argument for why we need universal family care. And again, the vision of universal family care is to create a continuum, to streamline the continuum of care between child care and long-term care. So just imagine, for any of these stories that you heard, that like when I think about, just imagine being able to draw upon a family care insurance fund to pay for childcare after you've given birth, so that you can go back to work full time and actually save for your children's college or your own retirement. And then if your mother suffers a stroke in a year, you can draw on that fund to take work leave and help her recover. And then imagine later down the road, when and if your mother needs more support and wants to stay at home, that you could tap into that fund again to pay for home care supports. So that's sort of the vision of what, when we talk about universal family care, that's the vision of what we're talking about. I do want to say that the growing and the professionalizing of the care workforce is a huge promise of this program, in addition to the supports that most families need. But we believe it can really help us ensure now more than ever that we're creating good care jobs. By 2030, home care will be the largest occupation in the workforce. That's not that far from now. Now it could be the largest occupation of crappy jobs, or it could be the largest occupation of really good family sustaining jobs. And that's the argument for why we need now to create universal family care that really brings the workforce needs in together with the needs of families. So I'm just going to close by saying I do think states are on the front lines of this. We, up in Maine actually, have also been working on and introducing a universal family care legislation. Here in Rhode Island, I actually think Rhode Island has an incredible shot at frankly modeling what universal family care at the state level could be for the rest of the country. There are a lot of other states who are interested in paying attention. And just one little piece of origin story, when we started Caring Across Generations, our focus was on elder care, on long-term care. But as we started to work with families, what we would hear from them is a lot of what you heard here. Like, that's great if you can help me with my elder care needs, but what about my child care needs? And that's when we realized we actually can't continue to look at these systems differently. We actually need to build a comprehensive care infrastructure together. So there are many states who are excited to hear that Rhode Island is on this path, that Rhody Care is something you all are committed to and moving forward. And I'll just say, from both National Jobs of Justice and Caring Across Generations, we're really committed to being on this journey with all of you to help figure out what this looks like at the state level and pragmatically what it looks like, to ensure that more of us can age, live, and work with dignity. So, thanks.